Hello, it's working. Good. Hello, everyone. This is my second time only in Russia. I was here last year in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And I just wanted to say, when I was invited to come back this year, it was a real pleasure. I kind of fell in love with Russia last year. Maria tells me that everyone who's originally from Ireland is half Russian anyway. So I have everything except the language, so I apologise, I only speak English, but it's a real pleasure to be back here, and I've met some really inspiring and brilliant people from the independent theatre sector here and people who run festivals, and I'm kind of really interested to come back again. So British Council, anytime you want someone from Ireland who works in Scotland to come back and talk about what I do there, I'm your woman. So I'm not going to give you a lecture. I'm going to tell you some stories from my own experience, not just of Edinburgh and the festival that I work on now in Edinburgh, but also of my own background, because, as I've said, I'm not actually Scottish. I'm actually very much Irish, and indeed I'm from the north of Ireland, which I don't want to bore you all with the history of that small place, but just to kind of give you some context, it's a divided place. It's the part of Ireland that is still part of the UK. And so there are many people there who consider themselves to be Irish and have very much an agenda to have a united Ireland and resent being part of the UK. And there are equally people there who very much want to be part of the UK and see themselves and identify as being British. So growing up there, I was born in 1968, and for the non-mathematicians room, that does mean that I am indeed 50 this year. And so growing up in Northern Ireland from 1968 was a very particular context, because that was the year that the Troubles, the contemporary conflict there really started. My mother says it was definitely not my fault. But it meant that I had 50 years of growing up in an experience of a place that had bombs going off, that had one community pitched against another. And it meant that every time you put on the radio or the television, the stories were about conflict, the stories were about our own obsession with ourselves. And I felt as a young person growing up in that context that I didn't know, am I Irish, am I British, am I nationalist, am I unionist, am I orange, am I green? And to be honest, my parents tried to raise, there's 8 of us, so you can tell I'm from a Catholic background. So there are 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and we were raised to be free thinkers. So for me, it never sat comfortably with me to be defined as this thing or that thing. And I guess it was only really when I started to get involved with art and I became interested in poetry and literature and music and film, that I found a way that I didn't have to be one of those things. I could identify myself in a way that I wanted to. So I just tell you that background because art to me became a route for self-determination, for self-definition, for connection, and for finding new ways to look at old things or to look at things differently. So I come at it from a very particular and very passionate kind of place. A much more eloquent way of describing it was Seamus Heaney, who was a great poet from Ireland, who just died a few years ago. And Seamus Heaney, Ireland is a very small island. I mean, you come from Russia. Ireland is like tiny. But it's divided into, geographically, it's identified in 4 distinct provinces. So it's Ulster, Munster, Leinster and Connaught. But Seamus Heaney talked about the 5th province. He talked about this 5th province, which he described as being a place of the imagination. A place that sat outside geographic boundaries, sat outside political boundaries, and where you could really kind of live in a different sort of way. So I see myself as being from the 5th province, from Seamus Heaney's unique planet. And I just wanted to kind of tell you that by way of background, because I'm going to talk a little bit first about a big project that I worked on in Derry in Northern Ireland. And then I'm going to talk about Edinburgh and the job that I do now. So if you bear with me, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. So my very, very first job was not either of those. My first job was on a children's film festival in Belfast. So I got to be the programmer of this children's film festival. It was called Cine Magic, and it became just something so special because I resented growing up in a place where we just looked at ourselves and obsessed about our own problems. And so this Children's Film Festival became a way for me to introduce other young people like me who had grown up in Northern Ireland, to introduce them to the world through film, to introduce them to the world without them having to travel. So we brought films from Iceland and from Germany and from China and from India and from all over the world. And these young people from Belfast were able to see different cultural experiences, but to see them in their own place. And I ran that project for 10 years. It was just the best possible kind of first job I could have had. I absolutely loved it. And probably my bravest decision actually was, having set that up over 10 years, I decided that I had done what I could with it and I should move on. I really loved that job. I was like, but I kind of knew, and I tell you this because it's a decision I've consistently made, that once I feel I've stopped adding value to something, then I move on, even if I don't have another job to go to. So I've always sort of taken risks in that way, and somehow they've paid off for me because I really love what I do, but I can only do things when I still feel very passionate about them and when I still really feel like I believe in them and that I'm bringing something personally to the table. So after I did Cine Magic, I headed up, Belfast was bidding to be European Capital of Culture. And at the time, it was we were only 2 years into the peace process. This was 1998 was the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and this kind of moment of putting away weapons and a peace process in Northern Ireland. And so in the year 2000, Belfast decided it was ready and it was going to bid to be European Capital of Culture. We didn't win. There were 2 bomb scares the day the judges came to decide if Belfast could do this thing. But it was an amazing process because we spent a year actually having a conversation across a whole city about what it meant to be from that place, how we defined ourselves rather than how those looking at us from outside would define us. And what happened was that all of the things that we predicted, all of the buildings that we predicted, all happened. Belfast is a city that is very comfortable with buildings and with physical infrastructure. But all of the ideas and the creativity and the content that we had wanted to develop didn't happen. So as a result, at that time in the year 2000, there were 9 miles of wall. Some of these walls, like the Berlin Wall, huge walls dividing the 2 communities in Belfast with barbed wire at the top of them. And so in the year 2000, when we were bidding to be European Capital of Culture, there were 9 miles. There's now 20 miles of peace wall, even with a peace process and even with people putting down their weapons. So I tell you that story because I think arts and culture and the way it can connect and take down the psychological walls is a much more important thing than the buildings. So, having said that, cut to 10 years later, and I got this job in Derry, which is the other city in Northern Ireland. Derry is a city that has a huge history of conflict. So some people, if you're Irish and you're Catholic and you're nationalist, you call it Derry. If you're from a unionist British background, you call it Londonderry. So it's Derry, Londonderry, legendary, whatever. But to be given, for that city to be given the UK City of Culture title was in itself a very complicated thing, because the majority of people in Derry consider themselves to be Irish. So having a UK title was already very controversial. So it was the most challenging, difficult, political job I've ever done in my life. But I wanted to take you on a bit of a story through it and show you some pictures, because we tried to do everything differently. I had to put together a team, had to put together the budget to make this year-long cultural programme happen. And what we wanted to do was we set out some big ambitions. We wanted to engage the whole city in the process. We wanted to involve both local artists, but also bring in work from outside and connect artists and inspirational thinkers from outside. And we wanted to bring people who are normally on the edges of the city's cultural life right into the centre of it. So from the start off, we said, look, we can't do any of this if we're going to do everything just the same way that people always do these programmes. So from the very start, we tried to do everything in a different way. So there wasn't one artistic curator, there wasn't one mega programmer to decide on what culture was and to make the Year of Culture happen. Instead, we recruited 6 different people from very, very different backgrounds, some from local, some international, and we brought these people together with very different ideas and said, can you help us? But the brief is, you've got to work with the existing cultural organisations, the people who have been here and been working here for years. So now I'm going to show you some photographs to kind of... Oh. Maybe I'm going to show you some photographs. Maybe I'll just use the buttons on here. Aha, we're sorted. I'll forget about this, high tech. So the Turner Prize, it's the biggest prize in the UK for visual art, and it had never been outside of England. So we asked the Tate, could we bring the Turner Prize and have it in this small city in Northern Ireland? And the Tate said yes, but they wanted to bring all of their curators, all of their team over and deliver the Turner Prize onto Derry. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. We have our own curators, we have our own coordinators, so we'd love you to have the Turner Prize, but we've got to do it in a way that fits with this place. So the Turner Prize that year, the Tate actually eventually, we had to send our curators over to be interviewed. And then when they saw these 3 curators and they said, actually, yeah, they're kind of smart. Okay, Derry has smart people too. So our own curators curated the Turner Prize this year. And also what was really interesting was we didn't put it inside a traditional gallery. Part of the whole process of Derry emerging from conflict was that the walls started to come down and there were parts of the city that were revealed for the first time. And one of those parts was a former British military barracks. And so we used one of the buildings that had been part of a military barracks to become the venue for the Turner Prize. And we worked with the Tate to really transform this building. And it became such a symbolic thing that this building that had been hidden behind barbed wire, had been a real source of negativity, was suddenly transformed by hosting this major visual arts prize. Hoffa Schechter, amazing choreographer, he had a show called Political Mother, and he wanted to bring that show to Derry. But again, we said, but we have our own dancers and we have our own musicians, you know, and this is a different context for this piece of work. And again, Hoffa, I mean, all of these artists and creatives were just brilliant because they worked with us. And Hoffa said, okay. So he auditioned for 30 local musicians. 10 of them were guys who normally are just in marching bands. And the marching band's history in Northern Ireland is quite a negative thing as well, especially if you're from a kind of nationalist community. So to have these guys suddenly seen for their musicianship rather than their politics or their ability to march was a really big thing. And Hoffa worked with them for a year. It changed their lives forever. He also worked with 30 local dancers and produced a version of Political Mother that is quite simply the most astounding piece of performance art that I've ever seen. And he did it adjusted it to the context of our city. We brought the National Youth Orchestra from London. There was 160 young musicians, but again, we said we want to do something differently. So we matched them with 160 musicians from Derry. And they did the performances in the two big concert halls, one in Belfast and one in Derry. But we were also like, that's very predictable. How do we get classical music into people's lives, into people's homes? And so what they decided to do was these 320 musicians, they break them into smaller like quartets or groups of 8 musicians, and they go and play in the homes of the 160 young people from Derry. So they played these beautiful classical music pieces in the living rooms of the young people from Derry. And they played them to their grannies and their aunties and their uncles. And the living rooms of these homes became the concert spaces for this work. So everything we did, we tried to do differently. We brought the biggest festival of traditional Irish music, which during the 50 years of the Troubles, this festival had never been to the north of Ireland. And so we made the pitch, we made the bid, and this festival came to the north for the first time ever. And some 450,000 people attended the All-Ireland Fleadh. We brought world music. This is Buena Vista Social Club, Nile Rodgers and Chic. It was just such good fun. And then we used the stories of the city itself. So this is the Columkill, or Columba was the famous saint who came from Derry, and people from all communities recognise this saint as their own. And so we worked with an outdoor arts company to pretend that he'd come back to the city from the 100 years that he'd been away, hundreds of years. And we would tell him all the stories that he had missed in those hundreds of years. But we wouldn't tell them. We recruited and auditioned for 1,000 local people to tell those stories. And we turned the whole city into like a cultural map where there were performances happening right across the city. And we used the river itself to bring Scotland's Loch Ness Monster. Apparently at some stage, St. Columba had banished the Loch Ness Monster under the water. And so we resurrected this Loch Ness Monster. This was absolutely huge. You can't really tell the scale of it here, but it was enormous. And the monster came up the river to do battle with Columba on the river. These are some of the stories. Amelia Earhart landed in Derry. So these are some of the stories that the local people wanted to tell Columba when he came back. There had been a huge shark that had come up the river at one point. And this was the new bridge that connected the two sides of the city. We had all of the choirs of the city. Derry has a real history of singers, and everybody can sing. So all of these choirs lined across the Peace Bridge, and they sang as Columba went out to do battle with the monster on the river. But instead of vanquishing the monster, he transformed the monster into 4 beautiful swans. And so the symbolism of that was, transformation is better than warfare. On the 21st of June, the longest day of the year, because Derry is such a musical city, we decided we would have a whole day that was just about music. But again, it wouldn't be us bringing music to people. It was an invitation to anyone in the city who could play, who could perform, to come out and play and perform on that day. And we would choreograph different opportunities, but it was all about the people of the city coming out to perform. This is an ancient fort just outside Derry, and we decided we would invite people to come and sing in the dawn. So at 4 a.m. in the morning, we had no idea if 1 person or 10 people would show up, but we said, let's start the day with song. And as you can see, hundreds and hundreds of people showed up at 4 a.m. in the morning and sang for the sun coming up on this ancient fort. Then we come down from there, and This is at 7 a.m. in the morning on the same day. These aren't just hot air balloons. They're what's called a sky orchestra. So attached to each one of these balloons was huge speakers, and the idea was to wake the city up to beautiful orchestral music playing. So there were 13 of these balloons floated across the sky. The reflections were in the river, and everybody came out of their houses to look up and hear this extraordinary music being played to them as they woke up in the morning. So it was a really special time. And I suppose this photograph really kind of shows every week of the City of Culture year looked like this. People just came out because they were reclaiming their own public spaces, and they come out in a kind of sense of joy and celebration and a desire to. These buildings behind are the former military barracks. So these people had never actually been in these public squares before. And so every time there was an event or an activity, the city streets just became filled with people. This is very much my memory. Again, this is the same square with the buildings and thousands of people gathered. We took over disused shirt factories, a big history in Derry of women going out to work whilst the men stayed at home and looked after the children, because it was shirt making, it was linen, it was making fabrics, making materials, making clothing. And so we reclaimed some of these disused shirt factories and created art installations and re-employed some of the women who had worked there to create new forms of merchandise and new forms of materials. This is a particular story. Maria, you can smile now because I told you about this one earlier. So because of the history of shirt factories and women working in Derry, there's a big thing for women to get dressed up then at the weekends, because they were wearing really sad and tired clothing all week long. So at the weekends, they just wanted to come out and look fabulous and be glamorous. And it's still a big thing in Derry. If you go there, honestly, the women are just their hairs are all done, and they wear beautiful makeup, and they look amazing all the time. I don't, obviously. So this group of women came, and I want to show you this picture because it was all about how we defined art and culture in that year. And I have a real particular thing about how sometimes we can set culture up here, so far removed from people's daily lives. The images you see are usually ballet, opera, classical music, but that's not for everybody. And I think we need to have new language for how we talk about art and how it connects with people, because sometimes it can really close many people off. So a group of women had come during the City of Culture and said, look, we want to be part of this, we'd like to do something. And I said, well, what's your idea? Then they said, well, we like to dress up, and we all buy these expensive wedding dresses, and we wear them once, and then they hang in a cupboard, and they're never seen again until we show them to our daughters or something. We'd love to have one day where we put an invitation to all women, whether they're 18 years old or 80 years old, put on your wedding dress on a Saturday morning, and we'll just drink champagne and we'll celebrate beauty. So, Artichoke, who are a big arts company in London, just recently did this big project in the UK to celebrate women's suffrage and women getting the vote, where they put out an invitation to women in all parts of the UK to come out and march one Sunday and to wear purple and wear green. And that's called a piece of art because Artichoke commissioned that. But why is this not art? Because these women self-determined that they were going to come out and that they were going to have a day of celebration, and they raised lots of money for breast cancer in the process of doing this. And I think it's art. I think it's fabulous. And they had such an amazing, fun day, and everybody who was there had such a fun experience just watching them and watching the joy in their faces. And there was one real bride in the middle of this, who was very forgiving, it has to be said. This is a young woman from Derry. She was only 18 years old, brilliant singer-songwriter, And she was really kind of discovered in that City of Culture year. She was nominated for a Mercury Prize, which is the equivalent in music to the Turner Prize in art. It's a really big deal in the UK. But what's really interesting about this young woman, she calls her artist name is Soak. And what's really interesting about her is that she is also a young lesbian woman. And there had been a bit of history in Derry of homophobia. And so for this young woman to kind of come out to be an amazing singer-songwriter and become this kind of ambassador for her city and completely acceptable for her to be who she was also a really powerful thing. We transformed buildings. We worked with Artichoke to commission artists to transform buildings through light, a bit like the wonderful festival outside of St. Petersburg, the Festival of Light that I saw images of the other day. This is on top of one of the old shirt factories, a light installation from an artist. We used the river. This was really beautiful because of the kind of challenges of the past in this city, there were quite a lot of suicides and a history of suicides in this river. So these figures became really quite kind of symbolic as a kind of spiritual memory. This was a park, a public park that was transformed into a fire garden. And they put vanilla essence into all of the fires, so it was the heat and the smells, and there was a weird French music playing. It was really very cool. This is another picture of the fire garden. And this happened over 4 nights in November. Normally, Ireland is a bit like Russia in terms of the weather, only we don't get it just so cold as you, but November's pretty cold and people aren't used to coming out in November, and we had worried in the City of Culture year about we know we can do it in the summer, but how do we get people into the public realm in the wintertime? So this fire garden was just, and the whole kind of Festival of Light was amazing. It ran over 4 nights. We actually had to put it on for an extra night because people loved it so much. The entire city was the canvas for art in that year. There was no place that we didn't work with people to perform and to put on new work. We made space for romance. We built bridges, both literally and metaphorically. We reimagined what it's like to be home and what it means to be home through art. We celebrated joyously every day. And we danced, and we danced, and we danced. So that's my Derry story. And just as a kind of reminder, this is Derry in 1968. So I can show you all of those images of joy, but this is really the kind of journey that the city has travelled on in this time frame. And it's important to remember that we had these scenes in the past, and we don't want to go back to them. Those buildings that I showed you, the ones that where the events happened and that had been the former military barracks, this is what they used to look like. And this is what you will see once you go outside of Belfast city centre. You will still see very much of this all across Belfast. And the reason I wanted to tell you the Belfast story before the Derry story is because in Derry we didn't have time to build buildings. We didn't have time to put all of the effort on infrastructure. So all of our money and all of our work went into content. It went into ideas and to the creative content. And as a result, by the end of the City of Culture year, in fact, by 3 months into the City of Culture year in Derry, the police, who before that had only been able to go around the city in Saracens, armoured vehicles, were on bicycles. And that's a journey travelled. And I think it could only have happened because of the particular approach that we took to culture, that was inclusive, that was engaging, that was about breaking down old definitions and involving as many people as possible, including the police, who recruited 4 officers to work with our team. Before that, the police had such a negative image in the place. And even members of my own team had said, if we're going to work with the police, I'm not working with them, I'm out of here. And I had to say, look, we're supposed to be doing everything differently here, so you need to adjust your mindset in the same way as we're asking other people to. Within 4 weeks of those 4 police officers working with us, people were calling them the culture cops. So it was a real kind of distance travelled. I'll show you this last photograph. This was a French photographer who came to Derry in 1969, and he took this photograph of this young woman against this kind of backdrop of a ruined street that had been bombed. So that photograph took up the whole back wall of an exhibition. And this woman, we noticed, she was coming in to stand there every day. And then somebody told us, this is Anne. This is Anne Kelly. This is the same woman in the photograph. And this is her in the same street now. And Anne's story was that she couldn't even remember that photograph being taken in 1969, but she remembered that she was wearing sparkly shoes. I told you, Derry women like their fashion. So these are all, I could bore you with all of the kind of economic impacts. I just shortcut by saying it was really impactful economically. More importantly, much more importantly, in my view, it was the most peaceful year ever in the city of Derry. It created a positive perception of the city, both within the hearts and minds of its own people, but also it really challenged and changed perceptions of how people from the outside saw it. I call it the Wizard of Oz moment, from when Dorothy walks out of the black and white of Kansas into the glorious Technicolor of Oz. That's what it felt like to be there in that year. And it gave a real sense of confidence and pride in local people to be part of that city. Seamus Heaney, I'll go back to our great poet who said it much better than me, and this will be a challenge for our translators. Yep. But we really use this piece of poetry as our narrative structure for the City of Culture year. And Seamus Heaney said, "So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a farther shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells." So that's my Derry story. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Edinburgh Fringe. Because the Derry thing was so amazing. I was exhausted by, afterwards I thought, I don't want to ever do anything big again. I just want to go home, lie down, talk to my children, walk the beach, see my dog. And then I started to get these emails about the Fringe, and Edinburgh Fringe was looking for a new chief executive. And if it had been any other festival, I wouldn't have been interested. But this festival it's kind of founded on it's founded on a set of principles that just appeal to me personally. So the Edinburgh Fringe started in 1947. In fact, it was the Edinburgh International Festival that started first, and it started in 1947 actually as a means to reconnect Europe through culture after the war. So it was a festival that was supposed to be about putting composers back together with orchestras that had been divided because of their political differences through the war or whatever. And so it had this kind of really great idealism behind it. And there were 6 local Scottish companies and 2 English companies who were kind of amateur production companies that wanted to be part of this great new festival. But the festival director only saw art as being ballet and orchestra and classical music and opera, and didn't think that these kind of local people should be part of that. So they were rejected from the first international festival, but they decided that they would do it anyway. So really, the Fringe started as an actual act of defiance. And it started with a fundamental kind of principle that if people had something they wanted to say and they wanted to say it in a creative way, that the Fringe would be a platform for them to do that. And it is still fundamentally that same core principle today. And that's what made me want to be part of this festival. The Fringe it's open access, so that means that I don't curate it. There's no single curator, there's no single programmer. There are 320 different venues this year. Some of those are permanent venues that are established theatres in the city, but many, many of them are literally put up within the space of about 1 week. Huge theatres, Spiegel tents, venues that pop up all over the city in order to make this festival happen. The organisation that I'm chief executive of, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society, we don't have a curatorial role. I don't make judgments about what's art and what isn't. What we do is, the best way to describe it is like an early version of YouTube. So it's an open platform where anyone who wants to participate and can find a venue to hold their work can do that. And what we do is we offer support and advice to artists year-round to tell them about what it is to be in the Fringe, what the challenges are, what venue might work best for them. So we have a team of people who support artists and performers. Then we support the audiences, because the Fringe is now this. So it's like absolutely ridiculously massive. There's now, this year there were 3,700 shows with over 50,000 performances of those shows over the month of August. So the other job we do is to help the audience to navigate their way through this kind of huge choice. And some people get a thing called selection paralysis. Yeah. So they just look at this and they go, oh no, I can't even be bothered. So we develop all kinds of tools, from the website to the app to the programme. We manage all of the ticketing and the box office. And we provide information to try to help audiences navigate their way through the festival. In terms of content, that we also have a huge kind of street performance space as well. So this street that you can see here, it's in Edinburgh, it's called the Royal Mile. And it's called that because it has Edinburgh Castle at one end, and then at the other end it has Holyrood Palace, which is the Queen's residence in Edinburgh. And it's exactly 1 mile from the palace to the castle. And so we use that space for street performers. So there's like 250 street performances per day that happen on this street during August. So it's a huge kind of outdoor festival, as well as all of the things that happen inside the venues. Oh, blank one. Oh, I know what this is. This was the very first programme with the 6 Scottish companies and the 2 English companies. So the second page will come up. For some reason, it comes up very slowly. But you can see, yeah. So it went from that to this over 70 years. As I said, everyone is welcome, but I will also qualify that by saying it's easy to say that everyone is welcome, but Edinburgh is an expensive city. To come and put a show on there for a month is very costly, to pay for accommodation. And over the 70 years development of the festival, it's not like a traditional festival that curates and commissions work. So nobody pays you to come there. In fact, for many artists, they pay to come there. So you have to really understand what the opportunity of this festival is. There are 1,400 people who register with us who are arts industry from across the world, who are curators and programmers who come to Edinburgh specifically to look for work to take to their own countries or to take to their own festivals. So it is definitely a place to have your work seen, to have your work selected, and to have your work toured. There are also 1,200 media representatives from around the world who register with us. So they come to critique, to review, and to write about work and to write about the festival. So we are very clear when we say to people who are interested in coming to Edinburgh, you need to understand this space because it's competitive, it's huge, it can be frightening, and you need to really know what you want from this opportunity before you go there, because it's most part it's an investment for which sometimes and some people get no return, and for many people it can be a real career-defining moment. But my advice to anyone who ever wants to come to Edinburgh is please, please do your research first. Talk to us, get advice, insight, support. If you can, even come for a year before and understand the landscape, because it is, it's really quite something. So these are some of the images you see on the street. It's a very exciting place. Anything can happen. You just don't know what you're going to meet on any given day in Edinburgh. Sane people, crazy people, headless people, weird bagpipes kind of people. So the street is really, I love the street performers because it's an access point. And so if you live in Edinburgh and you have no money at all, you can come and experience the festival. And some of the street performers are world-class artists who then go on to fill the stages of the venues of the Fringe. So you can genuinely see quite amazing things there. You can see everything from cabaret to international theatre productions to circus acts and circus performers, world-class dance. And what is the impact? The Edinburgh Fringe is not the only festival that happens in Edinburgh in August. There's also the Edinburgh International Festival, there's the Edinburgh Book Festival, there's the Art Festival, and there's the Edinburgh Tattoo, the military tattoo. A combination of those festivals in August brings in an audience every year of 4.5 million people. That makes it on a par with the FIFA World Cup and second only to the Olympics, except that it happens every single year. And I just think if it was a sporting event, people would be shouting about it from the rooftops. But arts and culture never seems to get the same recognition or attention. So it's funny now when I use that statistic and talk about it being as big as the World Cup, I can see all these kind of business people in suits and stuff go, wow, wow, that's amazing. Because as soon as you use a sporting analogy, it suddenly kind of lands just how important these things are. The Fringe alone brings an economic impact, and this is like a 5-year-old statistic of 173 million into Scotland every year. The people of the city are really proud of their festivals, and I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but these are the numbers associated with the Fringe. Again, I'm not going to read this stuff out, because one of the things, when I first came to the festival, one of the things actually that I found kind of disturbing, my very first press conference, I had 10 journalists, and I had spent a whole night going through, but actually not just one night, I'd spent a whole week going through this programme and seeing what artists were talking about and what kinds of subjects and what sort of content they were covering. And I was just absolutely blown away, because it was like a reflection of the world. Every single subject you could imagine was being covered by comedians, by artists, by brilliant theatre writers and dramaturgs, and it was all in this programme. But when I went into my first press conference, I went in so full of excitement and enthusiasm to talk about the art and the content. And they had like the last 10 years statistics listed in front of them. And so for the first 10 minutes, every question was, do you think there's 20 more comedy shows this year than there were last year? Or, do you think there's slightly less venues than there were last year? And I stuck this for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then I remembered I'm from Northern Ireland. And I put my handbag over my shoulder and I said, look, actually, this is the most boring conversation we could have about the most interesting festival I could imagine working on. So you don't need me here. You can I'll leave you with all kind of my team, and you can ask them about the history of the numbers. I don't care. And I went to leave, But not before using the joke that I can't believe there are 10 male journalists in the room and you just want to talk about the size of this festival, which was a bit cheeky. But as I went to leave, the guy from The Guardian called me back and he just said, hold on, hold on. He said, look, the reason we do this is because this is what the Fringe Society have been giving to us for the last 10 years. And when I looked at the press releases, the whole narrative had become about the numbers. The whole narrative had become Fringe, biggest Fringe ever, Fringe, biggest ticket sales ever. And I was like, oh my God, this is so disappointing. So the first biggest challenge that I felt I had in the job was to remind people and to completely reconnect with the roots and the history of where this festival had come from. So 2017 was the 70th anniversary, and we used that year for a citywide and a fringe-wide conversation about what this festival actually meant to people. What does it mean to people now, and what has it got the potential to mean in 5 or 10 years' time? And it was amazing. We even put a video booth on the Royal Mile and invited people to come in and just spend 3 minutes talking about what this festival means to them, or if they hate it, if they love it, they could say whatever they wanted. And we used all of this information to kind of inform what we're going to do over the next 5 years. It was a really amazing process, and I could talk forever, as you can tell. So I'm going to stop now so that we can have more of a conversation and see if you have any questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, if you have questions, you can raise your hand and we'll come up with a mic and you will have the opportunity to ask the question.
Меня слышно, да? I have a question regarding, I saw Fringe in Amsterdam, and I guess it's you're also in charge of the way it works in the city and the principles probably extend there, but it was really nice the way some of the hubs were used, the transportation hubs, like some of the plays began on top of the bus stop, for example, and then the actors would come up across the church. And so it completely changed the way the city was functioning during the time. And I think I was there for 10 days during it, before and after. My question is whether you monitor some of these things before to get the baseline of the situation, then during the festival, and then after, do you work with some of the city planning or kind of transportation or urban designers to tell them this is how it was affected, maybe has it changed in any way, or do you work with these guys after to contribute to urban design?
Thank you. It's a really good question. We couldn't possibly do a festival of this scale that has such an impact on the city without working with all of the city partners. So we work with the city council, we work with the security forces, we work with the transportation people. Everyone is involved. So there's a huge amount of work that we do after the festival to do all of the analysis about where our audiences were and where the concentrations are and where there's most likely to be pedestrian traffic and how safe are people. And then the council also do a huge kind of analysis afterwards too. And then we come together and we plan for the next year, and anywhere where there has been a challenge or a difficulty, we try to come up with solutions together. We're actually in that whole process at the moment. So that's kind of one part of the question. We have huge amounts of data. And then the second point that you made about Amsterdam, it's a really good point, because this was the other thing that we discovered in the 70th anniversary year. Where we were running a thing called Fringe World Congress, because there are now something like 300 Fringe festivals around the world. And so we had this thing called Fringe World Congress to share learning and experience between the organisations like ours who underpin the festivals. And 65 different Fringe festivals from around the world came together. And it was the year kind of Donald Trump, it was the year of Brexit, so people were crying. And saying, you know, we're just involved in the arts, what power do we have? And it was at that moment that we kind of connected that it wasn't just 70 years of the Edinburgh Fringe, it was 70 years of the whole Fringe concept. And now there's these 300 Fringes around the world, so we were like, God, is there something we can do to actually harness the power of this network to talk about freedom of expression? And that was really the kind of fundamental narrative about the Edinburgh Fringe that came into play, was that this isn't just a festival. Because it's uncensored, because it's open access, because anyone can perform there, it's a platform for creative freedom. And so we used this narrative to do a really simple thing. We didn't have time to think of anything more deep and meaningful, so we thought we'd do one simple thing to connect us all on the 70th anniversary of the concept of Fringe. So we did a thing called World Fringe Day on the 11th of July in 2017. And it was just a call out to everyone who was running a Fringe festival around the world to celebrate the idea of creative freedom. We had 32 million reach on one day. And it just kind of really brought home that we're not without power, that there is power in connectivity and collective experience. So now we're in a really kind of meaningful plan about how do we use that global network towards the 75th anniversary so that we can actually do something that properly connects and is properly meaningful.
Yeah, Shona, thank you for a beautiful presentation, a very moving kind of personal insight into this. You said the word, Brexit. So I'm just wondering if you would like to comment on the future of the cultural events in Northern Ireland and Ireland generally in post-Brexit Britain, post-Brexit Ireland. But also kind of very small specific question. How big is your team at the Fringe? And how you define kind of what the team is, whether you include volunteers, etc. Thank you.
So I'll answer that second question first because it's easy. So the team in the Fringe Society we've only got 25 people. So there are 25 of us year round, and the biggest number of the team are there to offer support and advice to people who potentially want to participate. And then as we get near the festival around May time, we start to recruit more people. The Fringe Society doesn't use volunteers because there's a big thing in Scotland in particular right now that anyone who works in the arts should at very least earn the living wage. So we're what we call a living wage employer. So we deliberately don't use volunteers. We employ all of our staff. So by the festival time, we probably have about 300 people because we manage all of the street events and there's a big sort of stewarding and public safety. So that's that question. The other one is slightly more complicated, Brexit. So I'm from Northern Ireland, and the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in Europe. And now I work in Scotland, and the majority of people in Scotland voted to remain in Europe. So it puts you in quite a tricky position when other people have determined that you're actually going to do the thing you don't want to do. And for us in the festival, it's really quite worrying because we had a history of ease of process in terms of visas. So the festivals in Edinburgh have a thing called permit-free status, which means that people don't need a working visa to come and be an artist or to come and work during the festivals. They just need a visitor visa. So we're kind of really worried about that, even though the UK government tell us that that won't be affected. But still nobody really knows. As a person from Northern Ireland, I don't need to tell you why I'm particularly worried about the idea of a border coming back across that tiny island is just such an anathema. So yeah, it's something that really concerns us because last year we had 58 countries represented on the Fringe. It's a truly international festival that has always welcomed international artists and the combination of the other festivals, the book festival, the international festival as well. There's 85 different countries represented across all of the festivals. So it's a real deep worry for all of us, not just for the artists who can come and participate, but also in my first year at the Fringe, when we did our all-staff training day, when we had the team of 300 for the festival, we did a kind of, anybody speak Italian in the room, anybody German, anybody, and there were 17 different nationalities on our team. So the idea that will be diminished in any way is quite frightening and is something that we're being very vocal about. So yeah, it's a worry, but it's still that big black vacuum where we don't really know what it's going to look like.
Hello. Hello, good evening. First of all, thank you very much, not even for the talk, but for what you do. My question is the following. We are now helping a northern city to create a complex culture project. So we want to encourage the local community to do something large scale. And we are facing the problem of engaging the local residents. That's an industrial town with a lot of people who are employed at factories and plants. And I wanted to ask you, what engagement tools did you use in Ireland? First of all, how did you engage the local people? And how did you lure them into this new cultural context? And the second question, how do other people get this franchise Fringe? So how can I understand if we are eligible for being a Fringe festival too?
Okay. So I'll give you one example of one of the ways that we engaged local people in Derry, because that big project where the Saint came back to the city. The reason that worked and the reason we were able to get 1,000 local people to participate and be part of that is because it was a very local story. It was their story. It was something that they had grown up with. There's schools called after St. Columba. There's squares called after. So it was something that was already a really deep connection. And also we chose artists and writers who came from that real sort of experience of how to connect with people at their own level. So we worked on that project. We selected the writer Frank Cottrell-Boyce, and he had just done the opening ceremony of the Olympics in the UK with Danny Boyle. So he was an artist who was coming with a real sensibility to help ordinary people to tell their own stories. So I think it's partly about choosing something that connects with people in the first place, and then working specifically with artists who have that sensibility, who want to work in a social context and who care. And when Frank came to Derry to do that project, as the managing organisation, we wanted to put him up in a nice hotel and to really look after him. He chose to live in a tiny flat in one of the communities. He stayed there for 6 weeks and just became part of the local community. And by the end of the project, they gave him the keys to the city. So there's something about working with artists who really come from that place. On your other question, I have to make this really clear. We don't own Fringe. So those 300 Fringe festivals around the world are all their own Fringe festivals. It's not a franchise. That would be completely against the whole idea that this is about freedom of expression and lack of ownership. But it's different in different parts of the world. So in Canada, there is the Canada Association of Fringe Festivals, and they have actually trademarked North American Fringe or Canada Fringe. So to do a Fringe festival there, you do actually have to get permission to use the trademark, but that's definitely not where Edinburgh comes from. I mean, anybody can determine, not only use the term Fringe Festival, but also determine what that means in their own context. So there are different models of Fringe all over the world, but Edinburgh certainly doesn't own it. The concept started there, but we just own the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and we don't even own that because it's actually owned by all of the artists and venues and people who make it happen. We're just the boring administrators underneath that help pull it all together.
Good evening, and thank you for your presentation. I have the question regarding how do you select the artists that participate in the festival every year? Obviously, there should be more artists willing to participate in the event than the time frame can afford, right? So I'm curious about the selection process. Do you have any additions maybe for the artists, or how does this work? No? And yeah, I've got a second question. It's about staff. When you when you recruit people, do you recruit internationally, or do you look for people only from Edinburgh or from Great Britain?
Okay, so the two questions. The first question, it's not that kind of festival. So we don't curate. We don't. It's. I'll go back to the YouTube example. We create a platform, and the whole city is the platform, and anyone who wants to perform there, who can find the right venue. There is no selection criteria. Some of the venues do program or do curate, but like there's hundreds of them, so you could choose to work in one of the venues that does curate, or you could choose to put your show on in a local pub. And it's some of the venues sell tickets, some of them it's free, and then you can put money in a bucket at the end of the show. So it's there are people who have been to the Edinburgh Fringe, I know, in this room, and they can tell you in Russian what it's really like. But it's not like a traditional arts festival where one curator has an aesthetic vision and selects the work and there's a criteria or whatever. It's not like that at all. It's an open platform, and if you had a production that you wanted to bring to Edinburgh, our team can help with, well, what is your production? What kind of audience are you expecting? We think maybe these 10 venues might work for you, so we'll connect you to those venues and you begin a conversation. So it's not like, and the second question was, oh yeah. So we, I mean, as I said, we had, we have nationalities from all over the world who work on the festivals, but we don't advertise internationally. We advertise on the Fringe website, and we advertise on, there's a thing called Edinburgh Festivals Jobs, and what we find is people tend to search those and to look on those, and then people decide to apply. But it is an application process. Everyone has to apply and be interviewed then to work on the festival, but there are hundreds of opportunities. The biggest challenge always actually in Edinburgh is finding accommodation, and finding accommodation that is affordable. You're welcome.
Shona, I have a couple questions. The first question... oh
no, she's going to ask hard questions because she's been there.
Should you have a work permit to be the staff member of the Fringe for the festival? Or it can be other types of the visas if you're an international person?
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that, Maria, so I'm going to be honest. I know the answer if it's an artist, but I don't know the answer if it's someone who's coming to work on the festival, but I can find that out for you and tell you that. Because I know with artists, we have to send a letter of invitation in order for them to have the permit-free status, but we don't send a letter of invitation to workers, so I'm not 100% sure about the detail of that, but I'll find the answer for you.
Another question is how you handle the facts of violence or people who are too much, had some alcohol, or maybe some facts of abuse? Have you had any accidents like that, and how you manage that?
I don't know what you mean, Maria. Nobody in Edinburgh drinks alcohol. So. That's like saying nobody in Russia drinks alcohol. So this is why we work very closely with the police and with it, because we're not police officers. I mean, we're festival organisers. So ultimately, in Edinburgh anyway during August, because the city is so busy, there is an increased police service. There's secret service. There's all kinds of people all over the city just to make it more safe for people. But I mean, drinking happens, partying happens, very late nights happen. In fact, it's kind of a 24-hour city during the whole month. But you know, there's no more incidents than there would be on a normal weekend in any busy city. So it's more actually a question for us is if there is a piece of work that is put on, because we're a non-censored festival. If there's a piece of work that is put on the stage that is controversial, or that someone objects to. In fact, 3 years ago there was a piece of work from Israel that the Palestinian support groups thought was funded by Israeli government. It wasn't. And they protested outside the theatre. And then eventually I think it was the venue decided that they would take the piece of work off the stage. And we were asked so much, and I get asked still every year, what is the Fringe Society going to do about that? But our answer is always that in the same way as we support anybody's right to perform and anybody's right to express their ideas through their creativity, we equally respect anyone else's right to protest if they don't agree, as long as they're protesting safely and they're not doing anything illegal. So our fundamental kind of benchmark is if you're not breaking the law, then it's acceptable.
And my last question, can you tell more a bit about the professional, this program, about the curators, critics and producers that are registering with the Fringe, how it's happening and what services Fringe provide for them?
Okay, so as well as programming the street, there's one other space that the Fringe Society does program, and it's called Fringe Central. And we take over one big building every year during the whole month of August, and it is our support centre for artists and performers. But it is also where all of the international arts industry, where all of the media come to. So we have our support services there for the artists. We have cushions, we have massage places, we have counsellors to kind of help your mental health during the festival. And it's a real kind of support centre for artists to come and meet each other, meet their peers, to chill out, to practical things like photocopying and Wi-Fi and computers, and so this is this space. And that's where all of the arts industry come as well, and they register there, and we hold events where people with a show can meet the curators who are visiting. We have a big event that's called Meet the Media, where we invite all of the journalists to set up a table and to allow people who have put on shows to come and pitch their show. So there's 135 different parts to this program. So yeah, sorry.
Hi, I understand that it's like kind of impossible, but do you have your favorite performances on your festival? I mean, maybe not the favorite, but one of the most remarkable one, like you have mentioned with the Bride March, like maybe something like this, like the most exciting ones. Well, can you remember one of them, like as an example?
You're asking me an impossible question because,
yeah, maybe
but also because the Fringe Society, because our organisation represents all of the Fringe, we're always very careful not to kind of make a judgment or like publicly we would never say which one is our favourite. But I can tell you what really excites me is there are a lot of new writers. There's a lot of young people. I think the most exciting thing about the Fringe is you have these really established, really recognised artists who come to the Fringe, and they come in these big productions, and people are like, oh, that's so-and-so, the really famous person, their show is going to sell out. And they don't. Because there's a new young company and somebody sees their work and the word spreads like wildfire. This is one of the most exciting, cutting-edge, new things you could possibly imagine. And I love that because it doesn't allow established artists to be complacent, because the public or the audiences for the Fringe are really sophisticated. We have a programme called the Friends of the Fringe, and there are now 12,000 Friends of the Fringe. And these are the people who get this programme every year, and they approach it like a military operation. They know where they want to go. They know the kinds of work that they want to try and find. And it's like an adventure for them. It's like a whole process of discovery. So my favourite thing about the festival is that there is no room for very famous or established artists. They can't just come there and be complacent, because the public will vote with their feet and they will not go to see that because there's something that's completely fresh, completely new, and it's the thing that spreads like crazy, and people just want to go see that. So it's the new things that I like. I love bravery and risk-taking, even if it's not perfect or polished. Just to see something that you're like, oh my God, I've never seen theatre produced like that before. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Осталось время на последний вопрос.
We have time only for the last final question.
Thank you, Shona, for your marvelous story. And what is the Fringe of your dream? Let's say in 10 years, how it will look like, how it will sound like.
Oh, wow. So that really came out of the result of the conversations we had in the 70th anniversary. Olga, thank you for the question. And the Fringe of my dreams is one that people across Edinburgh, so I start from the local, that people in local communities all across the city, and we're doing this big project at the minute where we're literally buying tickets for Fringe shows and we're giving them out through 26 charities right across Edinburgh to the communities that we know from our Google Maps and our postcode analysis. We know who is not coming to the festival. So we've done this big mapping exercise, and then we found 26 local charities: Young Lesbian and Gay Community, Elderly Care, Sikh Sanjog, asylum seeker bodies, and we brought them all together and we said, we're going to give you £50,000 worth of tickets to come to the Fringe. There's no limit. You choose whatever show you want. We don't care if you want to come to a famous comedian or you want to come to a new piece of theatre. And it has been the most exciting thing, because suddenly I'm getting emails from people saying, I've never been to any of the festivals before. I'd never even been into a theatre before. And this year I was able to bring my whole family to come and see this festival. And so now we're in a whole conversation with those 26 community groups about, well, what else can we do over the next 5 years? What do you want from this festival? What do you want from this resource? And now we're starting to ask artists who register to bring work, are you interested in working in a community context? And we're starting to kind of matchmake so that it isn't all about the festival, but it's about how you use this amazing resource and how you connect artists with communities who otherwise would not be connected at all. So one part of my vision is for the whole city to feel like art is not something that is out here and they're here, that the two things connect. I want to see in a post-Brexit landscape that anybody who is doing new and interesting work from around the world can find a way through support from their locally, but also support from us, can actually be able to come to Edinburgh and perform their work. So there's the local, there's the international, and most of all, because I think it's what people tell me is the biggest barrier, I want to find ways to make it affordable. I want to find ways to find new forms of accommodation that mean that greedy landlords and commercial operators can't make it impossible for people to come to the city. So those are some of the things. And then if I can do that, I'll go and walk the dog on beaches and talk to my daughters for a while. Thank you. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you so much.